Hello, welcome to Property Question Time. My name's Stephen Galpin, and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today is Hayley Andrews, property investor, mentor and CEO of Your Freedom Empire. Hayley, hi.
Hello, how
You
are
had
you?
a good trip down today?
I did, yes, thank you.
Not a wonderful start to the day.
No, not a wonderful start to today, unfortunately.
It's got a lot better though.
Tomorrow's always a new day though.
Well, it is.
It has got a lot better, John, because now I'm sat here with you.
Fantastic.
Well then,
Fantastic.
talking of tomorrow's, here's John Howard. John,
Yesterday's day, you mean?
John, welcome to the programme. Property developer, author, TV commentator and public speaker.
Great to be here again.
Good to have you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's get on with our questions. And Hayley, you're first. I'm considering investing in either a buy-to-let property or perhaps an HMO. However, my local authority says it's not issuing any more licences for HMO properties. With the current housing shortage, what do the panel think the authority's thinking is here? I find it very disappointing.
So licensing and planning are two very different things, and you need to look at both aspects if you are looking to convert any property into a HMO. Licensing, as long as there's no local restrictions from a planning perspective, will be granted as long as you adhere to the local licensing requirements and the property is fit for purpose. Where I think the question is coming from and why the local council are refusing to issue any further licensing, it may be that the property that they are looking to convert into a HMO is in an Article 4 area, so there's local planning restrictions there.
So what sort of thing would an Article 4 mean?
So
sort of condition?
Article 4 removes your PD rights basically, but it's normally brought into an area to control the number of HMOs that are operating in that area. So to control that. So normally if you have an area where you've got lots of HMOs around universities, airports, things like that, you will, the local government or the local council, sorry, can bring in Article 4 so that they can control a balanced community. What they don't want to happen is HMO, 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 because that will put families off, for instance, wanting to live in that area. So it gives the council the right to refuse planning permission. So it removes your permitted development rights. Whereas outside of an Article 4 area, 3 to 6 people, you can turn a property into a 6-bed HMO. Yes, it requires a mandatory license, but you don't necessarily, you don't need planning permission in order to do that.
I'm a bit puzzled though, really. I mean, as you quite rightly say, you'll often find the kind of area where an HMO will be successful is whether it's students, where there's a lot of travellers around, or people requiring that type of accommodation, and yet that's the area in which you say they might be restrictive about it.
Well, the reason they will bring restrictions in place is because everybody's cottoned on that HMOs work there. So rather than actually, buying a property and doing it as a standard buy-to-let or selling it as a family home, people are looking at it from a revenue point of view and saying, right, there's demand here. Let's turn every property into a HMO. And the reason they're doing that is because there is demand. But unfortunately, you do get areas that there's an oversupply. And then you have far too many HMOs and not enough family homes. Also, HMOs do have a bad reputation as well. If they're not managed correctly, they can cause antisocial behaviour, they can cause parking issues, refuge issues. They can become an issue if you've got too many within an area.
Well, I understand the need for balance, but I also understand the need for accommodation.
Yeah, absolutely. But it may be that actually they don't require that type of accommodation. Yes, there's a housing shortage, but in that particular area, there may be far too many HMOs. And the thing to remember as well is, they're controlling and managing the quality of accommodation that's come into that area, but a balance of accommodation to that area as well. So from a planning point of view, it does give them a lot of control. I understand where the viewer is coming from by saying, I don't understand it. Yes, it is very disappointing, but just because there is an Article 4 direction in place, it doesn't mean that you can't get planning permission. I have HMOs in Article 4 areas, and I've converted HMOs after Article 4 has come into those areas as well. So you can still get planning permission, but it's more of a a business plan, they have to know you. If you're brand new going into an Article 4 area and you're looking to get planning permission to run that as a HMO, the likelihood of you getting it is pretty low.
Okay. John, any experience in the Ipswich area of that kind of thing?
Well, with all due respect, I buy all over the UK and have done for 40 years. So I've done a number of, in my day, they were called bed sits. I say my day, hopefully it's still my day, but you know what I mean. So bed sits, and now it's, and yours, with respect to you. These days they're called, HMO, and you can have luxury HMO and all sorts. One thing I would say is that if you have too many HMOs in an area, then it tends to bring the price down of the other houses and family houses in that area a little bit. And the Article 4 does protect the market slightly, I would argue. So that's good. The other thing that's a good thing about Article 4. The bad thing about Article 4 is these local authorities are using it now to stop people doing, PD, office to residential, some of these other more complicated shops to residential. So they brought this Article 4 area. They brought them into these areas to thwart the government, really. And I think Robert Jenrick, the housing secretary, needs to put his finger out and actually sort this out, because they're not always being used. Their powers the council have are not always being used for the right thing.
No, I completely agree, and it's counterproductive, isn't it?
Sure, totally.
But I also read in the papers last week that a lot of councils are refusing to implement the government's PD rights.
Oh, cool. They're putting local restrictions. They're putting their own local slant on it, and it has become quite complicated again. Where they try to simplify the whole process and make it easier and quicker,
Goes the other way.
Then the local councils have then applied their own spin on that, which is what really they were trying to get away from.
Totally, Hayley. It's absolute madness.
Yeah.
And the government will step in and I think change the rules yet again in order to strengthen up what they're trying to do.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, John, your question.
Yes.
I've seen that the government is set to encourage the idea of self-build homes in an attempt to help solve the housing stock shortages. Do the experts really think this is a good and genuinely practical idea?
I think it's an incredibly naive idea to think that they put a target of 100,000, I shouldn't laugh, 100,000 people building their own homes within 5 years or something bonkers. I mean, at the moment, 10,000 people a year build their own home. And it's a dream for a lot of people. It's an aspiration. To get them to do it on a more, on a larger basis, I think is incredibly naive. They are making a 40% loan available. Presumably that's over the top of what you can get off the building societies or lending institutions to support this. But it's so complicated building your own home.
Well,
it needs a lot of expertise.
I think it's extremely ambitious.
Extremely
well,
ambitious.
look, we had it down here 20 years ago. The Docklands Development Corporation said, right, we're going to encourage self-build homes. I mean, there's a lot just over the road there. I'm not sure they're all still standing, but there were some there.
The whole thing is
but they were unmortgageable.
Yep.
They were uninsurable.
Yep.
They took 3, 4, 5 times as long as was scheduled to build. I just think it's a crazy idea.
Going forward, they'll be mortgageable and all those things because they've learnt from the past. But unfortunately, if you've got a really nice plot of land, yes, you can sell it to someone affluent who's going to build their own home on it. That's absolutely fine. And why shouldn't they? But I mean, there's only 10,000 people of them in the country at the moment. In Germany, interestingly, in some of these other European countries, up to 50% of the properties are built by individual people. But in this country where we've got the 10 big house builders, and by the way, there's just under 1 million planning permissions in place to build homes, and we're only building 232,000, well, it went up a bit last year, I think, but say 250,000 houses. But there's 1 million planning permissions in place, so that's interesting.
But I think, if you're smart at trying to find the right kind of builder to do it on a contractual basis, you're actually better off to use a proper developer builder, aren't you?
without question, you're not going to save a lot of money by doing it yourself, because
I don't think so.
you know, if you have to bring all the trades in, and you have to
Your
know
buying skills aren't going to be there, are they?
the buying skills aren't going to be there, and also, you know, you've got to know which bit you do first.
Yeah.
So it's not a simple exercise. It's a dream for a lot of people, designing their own home.
Is it? I don't know.
I think for a lot of people it's a dream, and it's an aspiration, and for those people it's fantastic. And if the government are going to help those people, even better.
I think it sounds like a nightmare waiting for somewhere to happen.
I agree. Yeah. Just leave it to the current 10,000 that are built in their homes, and kind of stick with that.
On that note, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join us again after the break. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. Joining me are Hayley Andrews and John Howard. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
So, Hayley, your second question. Can the panel advise me on the importance of energy certificates when I'm looking to buy a particular property? I understand the certificate is a mandatory inclusion in any sales pack, but does the information have any binding consequences, or is it simply a guide? Would my lender, for instance, look to the results in relation to mortgage availability?
Good question. So in regards to the binding conclusion part of that question, the energy performance certificate is carried out by an accredited energy assessor. I think that's their official name.
I believe so.
And that's registered on a national database as well. So there is binding consequences, and if it was done incorrectly or whatever, you would be able to go through the route of the person that carried out the certificate, as far as I'm aware anyway. So in terms of the energy performance certificate, property has to be E or above. December last year, there was talks about whether it would be coming up to a C in 2025 and then out through to 2028. As far as I'm aware, I don't think that's been passed off yet.
But if it doesn't come up to whatever?
Yes, so if for a property to be mortgageable or for you to let it out, it has to be E or above. If you wanted a conventional mortgage. Of course, I buy properties that are nowhere near E, but I have the view of improving the energy performance of that property, and I may purchase cash, bridge, private finance, John Howard's joint venture fund. So you can actually raise finance other ways to purchase the property, but of course you do need to calculate within your budget to improve that property to at least E or above.
Okay. Well, your energy surveyor, from what I've seen, and do forgive me if I'm wrong, but don't seem to be wonderfully qualified people or terribly highly qualified.
Well, they are accredited.
They're accredited. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's a better word.
Yeah.
And it's very much a tick box, isn't it? Exercise.
Yeah.
So if your property doesn't come up to standard, who is it that then gives you guidance on what to do rather than what you need to come up to?
So normally what happens is on the certificate, and you don't have to physically have a certificate, you can check the database as long as you've got the reference number, the address of the property, etc. But on the certificate it will have a current rating and a potential rating, and then normally at the bottom it will state what needs to be done in order to improve the energy performance of that property.
So it's a comprehensive document that you're going to get. Yes. Okay.
Couple of tips with EPCs. First of all, a lot of housing associations are selling their stock, sometimes people like us, hopefully, when they've got an E, because for them to be able to let a property, I believe now, they have to have the standard has to be C for these social rental companies. So that's the first thing. And to get it up to C is so expensive for them, they'd rather build new, which is what's happening.
Yeah.
The second thing is we're buying a block of flats at the moment, and it's got brand new electric heating in it. Now, obviously, wind farms and everything else, electric it's all the rage, it's all good, but it's a disaster for EPCs. It's a disaster, yeah. Even though it's a wet system, for some reason, you get you get a lower rating than you do if it's gas. And of course, gas is the one they want to get rid of. So there is a few things that they need to sort out with this because it is a problem, a real problem. So if you're having electric heating, you'll never get up to the same level as with gas heating. But of course, they want to get rid of gas and gas boilers for the environment. So it really is an interesting balance. They're sort of halfway through, I think, sort of sorting everything out properly.
So what you're suggesting is there really needs to be a rethink on how the certificate ratings
Absolutely.
are arrived at.
Yeah.
I think
Well, a
so.
lot of the buildings here, I mean, other countries, you know, their buildings aren't as old as ours, but the construction here in the UK is old. So it's quite hard to improve the energy performance, especially to a C. I mean, that's, you know. But in answering the question, it's very, very important to pay attention to that because, yes, it can affect a mortgageability. And if you are looking to rent that property out and it doesn't meet E or above currently and potentially going to a C, you can't legally rent that property out.
And you could be in for quite a bit of expense, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think they require you to spend up to $3,500 to make improvements if you are purchasing a property that isn't E or above, and they're looking to increase that to £10,000. If you still don't meet the grade that it should be in order to let it out or to be mortgageable, etc., whether that is E or C, how it's going to change, I don't know because it's not concrete yet, is it? But then you would, I believe, get an exemption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but it's a minefield.
From quite a simple question to quite a complex.
Glad they asked now, aren't you?
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Well, I think we'll swiftly move on. John, whilst residents of multi-unit developments have certain rights regarding appointing managing agents for their development, in most cases it's the developer who chooses the company at the start of occupation or before. Over time, there is often conflict between occupiers and freeholders in relation to running the building and the associated service charge costs. Do the panel think that it might be a good idea for occupiers to have the automatic right of choice of appointed agent, perhaps after the first 12 months of the development's life?
Well, technically they have, because of course, I think I've said on this show perhaps a couple of years ago where I had a freehold block of flats, a large block of flats in Norwich, and the residents all got together and they purchased it from me and nothing I could do about it. And they can not only can they purchase it, if they didn't want to purchase it, they could form their own management company, or they could get someone else to manage it on their behalf. So all the rules are there to do so. Whether they should have it from the very start is difficult because one, when you're selling a block of flats, however big it is, no one knows each other, and they all get together eventually and form an association. So till then, it is difficult for them to do so.
Well, John, let me just stop you there for a second because, right, you mentioned a development in Norwich that you have an experience of, and that's fine. Come into London, look at one of these blocks around here with 600 or 700 units in the single block, right? And I'll tell you now that 70% of those people will be living abroad. Okay?
Yes.
So to get the necessary majority to get governance over your block, the freeholder knows damn well it's going to be impossible for you to do it. On top of which, there then comes difficulties over this data protection business. The freeholder won't pass over the details of all the other residents and all the rest of it. And it turns out just to be actually rock solid for the freeholder to be able to keep hold of the development. And we've all seen in the past, I'm not suggesting all developers are this way or all freeholders this way, but you do get some that take profits perhaps where there shouldn't be profits taken on services provided.
In terms of management of service charge,
it's so complex, and I do feel sorry for these people that are perhaps trapped to a degree with a bad freeholder or a bad developer.
Well, I have to say the government have done a hell of a lot over the last few years to try and sort this out. Ultimately, if you've got a rogue freeholder, and there aren't many left now, I don't think, but there are some, I'm sure, then it is difficult. But you know, what can you do? If you've got a block of 600 or 700, it's quite unusual. Most blocks are 10 to 15, and most people are based in the UK and so on. I accept the fact on the odd occasion where it's a very big block, it might be different. But I think the government have brought in more and more rules to control the freeholders, to the point where actually now, if they go ahead with the new rules, which is 999-year leases, 0 ground rent, there is absolutely no point a developer retaining the freehold anymore.
But John,
no point at all.
John,
so who manages it?
The fly in the ointment there is that this regulation is not going to be retrospective.
No, but it can't be retrospective, can it? Because, if it was, there's millions and millions of pounds of investment people have in their freeholds, you know, investment companies, and look at London, look at some of the large estates in London, they would be beside themselves. They'd never give a donation to the Tory party ever again. They probably won't anyway now. So,
well,
you know,
that
you
might
can't
not be
have
such
it,
a bad thing,
can't, you know, you just can't have it always. And I think the government has done as much as they can to help and protect leasehold interests of residents.
I'd have to say, John, that in my view, I think that, we'll hear what Hayley's got to say in a minute, but in my view, I think the government does a lot of talking about this and not a lot of action.
Well, they've done a fair bit of action. Don't sure I totally agree with you, Stevie.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, like John said, there is no point really in holding the freehold. You know, we would buy properties, divide them up, do share a freehold, or even retain the freehold and put leases in place. There doesn't seem any point in doing that as a developer
going forward.
Yeah,
no, definitely not.
And if you are buying a property, you know, if you are buying a leasehold property with restrictions, or a freehold property, if you don't want to adhere to the leasehold, don't buy leasehold, buy freehold. You know, so I suppose my sympathy is...
That's not always possible in London, though.
Yeah, true.
Hayley, and I mean, just don't forget that a lot of the freeholds, and I'm talking not yards from here, freeholds can be sold for sometimes 25 to 30 times the ground rent collective.
Yeah, they can.
So it's quite a valuable asset. So the freeholders do like to hold on to it. They do like to put services in which sometimes do generate a profit or advantage.
It's an investment for them at the end of the day. Then what is the point in them doing
but
it if they're not making money?
But at the end of the day, it's people's homes.
Yes,
and that's what we have to be
true.
covered. It's like the ground rent issue. I mean, ground rents, for instance, on a housing estate are nonsense, aren't they?
Well, they've all been stopped again.
Yeah, and again, one or two of the bigger developers have said, well, no, we're just not going to do it. We don't want any.
Well, they should have done it in the first place.
Exactly my point, yeah, but they didn't. But anyway, look, there we are. That's all we've got time for on this show. So big thank you to John Howard and Hayley Andrews.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both very much for coming in and sharing your knowledge. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.